Normally what I would do is talk about the amazing run from both teams to get to the finals and whatnot, but I want to jump right into this one because I watched 2 games from Celtics Mavs the regular season. Sadly, the sample size isn't great. I would argue the second game they played against each other was a great sample, even though they didn't have Gafford in the starting lineup. He actually only played the first quarter, played like 5 minutes in that game, and Josh Green was also starting, which is something we're not going to see most likely. So I do want to break down a couple of things regarding coverages from these 2 teams that I did find interesting, and that's going to be the main theme of this video. I will make a pick on what I'm leaning towards as far as who I think is going to win this series towards the end of the video. I'm going to have clips from the game. I saw the Celtics put Jason Tatum on Derek Lively to start a bunch of possessions. Jason Tatum on Derek Lively is a very interesting strategy that the Celtics have done in 2 games already. Now, the reason they opt for this is because they have Jaylen Brown on Luka for the most part. That's the main matchup that the Celtics are really happy with. They're very comfortable with it. Have him fight as much as possible. Even pick him up full court for some possessions to try to make him work a little bit, turn him around, and basically milk some shot clock from the Mavs to put some pressure on them. And a lot of that worked. Luka has some insane numbers, which I'll show later on in the video. But basically, we would see Horford on Derrick Jones Jr. when Tatum was picking up Lively. And we would see the same thing in the second game where Tatum was picking up Lively and Kristaps Porzingis was on PJ Washington. So that's something that's very interesting because what the Celtics are trying to do with that type of coverage is if Luka is calling for a pick and roll with Derek Lively, which is like one of the main sources of their offense, Derek Lively, Daniel Gafford, I can use those guys kind of in the same breath because they're utilized similarly as a pick and roll man. Derek Lively is going to be more of a playmaker when he catches it in the paint. If he's on that like short roll, he's going to catch, he's going to look around before he really makes another move. Gafford's going to put it down and most likely try to get to the rim. But for the most part, these guys are used as one of the main sources of the way that this team generates buckets. So when Tatum's on Lively, Luka actually opts for Derrick Jones Jr. screens because he's looking for Horford on the matchups. And a lot of times those lead to tough threes. They led to some points at the rim. But Horford does a really good job of holding his ground because Luka isn't exactly the shiftiest guy. And Horford is just a smart defender, uses his length. He's done it for a long time, just knows how to use angles. It impressed me to see how Horford held his own against Luka. Now, you're going to look at those crazy numbers Luka averaged, but on the possessions where Horford was on him, even when Luka scored, it looked tough. And so either way, I think Luka would prefer Horford switching on to him or maybe even Porzingis when he's in the lineup instead. But basically, that took away lobs for the most part. Like those easy little dump off passes on the roll to a Lively were not there because he's running them with Derrick Jones Jr. And Derrick Jones Jr. not bigger than those guys. And so that takes away a lot of the middle of the floor stuff, which is something that the Celtics are really happy to take away. They don't want the ball to touch the middle. That's like basic defense. And so the Mavs would counter this by running Kyrie pick and rolls on the weak side and just kind of parking Luka on the other side of the floor. So when Kyrie calls for a screen from Lively and he's got Jrue Holiday on him, if he sets a good screen, which he usually does, Lively then rolls and you've got a favorable switch where it's Jrue on Lively or Drew's a little late to the Lively roll. He's not tall enough to kind of obstruct the pass, right? Like kind of like block Kyrie's sight. So Kyrie can make that pass pretty often. And then at that point, it's on the help defender. In this case, it was Kristaps Porzingis who was literally like a second late. And it made a big difference because I think Lively maybe kicks it out if KP actually shows in time. Maybe he takes it to the rim anyways, but then KP's there a little sooner. And so he actually scores on that one. That's the pick and roll that I'm worried about if I'm the Celtics. It's when we have Jrue on a ball handler and that ball handler calls for a screen because Drew's going to fight as much as he can over the screen. He doesn't give any airspace, and he's really good at fighting over screens. He's really good at staying attached to the on-ball guy, but in that split second or that short little time frame where Drew is recovering, there's a pass available to whoever it is that's rolling, and that is where the Mavs are going to find a lot of their offense. Now, the Celtics are going to have to make a tough decision. Are we going to show on that roll? Are we going to be late to that roll and give up 2 points because we don't want to give up open threes if we collapse too hard? Luckily for the Celtics, they have a lot of mobility. They're quick, 1 through 5. They cover a lot of ground. They're athletic. And so they're going to be able to show and recover better than a lot of other teams in the league. And here's the other part of this after watching these couple of games. You know, Luka's going to get the looks he wants, but I do feel like he will be challenged the most he's ever been challenged in this series defensively, because there's nowhere really for Luka to hide. Now, they can park him on Drew Holiday, right? Maybe they can park him on Derek White, but for the most part, all 5 guys on the Celtics can make plays. They can put the ball down. They can shoot the ball. This is going to be a very difficult series defensively for him because of the fact that there's just nowhere to park him if you're quote unquote trying to hide him. And he's been really good defensively compared to just the past. He's been really good in these playoffs, but I think this is the team. We're going to see what he's made of in this series defensively, because the Celtics are going to go at him as often as possible. And unlike other teams that have tried to do that, the Mavs have been able to kind of cheat away from guys in the last couple of series. Like when they played OKC, they had Josh Giddey that they could cheat away from, right? A guy that they can just late close out. He's not going to make you pay. Maybe he'll make you pay once in a while, but for the most part, the shot's not going to fall when it finds him. And the Mavs really packed a lot of the area in the paint, and they were able to look really good defensively because of that as well. And so when we look at Minnesota, they can also park someone on Gobert, right? They can cheat away from Gobert on defense. And so that's another part of it that I'm concerned about. Like that's what I think about in this series. There is no one really to cheat away from on this team. All 5 guys can shoot threes, and all 5 can put the ball down. And I've talked about that before. This is a Celtics team that you can't really hide someone on, because the Celtics are going to sniff it out and they're just going to go at the guy. There's going to be a lot of space for the Celtics that the Mavs are going to have to cover ground, and they've shown that they can do it. Now, when OKC ran the 5-man out lineup, when they put out Isaiah Joe in place of Giddey, it was looking much better. The problem is OKC doesn't have the same size that the Celtics have. That was the missing link for OKC in that series. That was the missing link for OKC all year long. It's just the overall size on that team just isn't there, because they have to help each other so much more on defense. They have to collapse harder on rolls because they want to deny lobs. They have to collapse on paint touches because one-on-one, Chet's going to do what he can, but once he leaves his feet to try to block a shot, maybe he contests it and the offensive player misses, but then because Chet is contesting, there's no one else around to grab a board because he is the tallest guy there. And at that point, the Mavs were just bigger and they were just grabbing boards and making them pay. So that's something that the Celtics are also going to do a really good job of. I want to know how the Mavs, when Gafford is obviously going to be in this lineup, how the Mavs are going to guard those pick and rolls, because when you have Kristaps Porzingis being guarded by Lively or Gafford, and the ball handler, let's say it's Luka guarding Drew Holiday, we've seen possessions in that second game where Drew Holiday is running a pick and roll with KP, and Lively has to show, because you can't drop on KP. That's a big no-no. Can't drop on KP. So obviously Lively has to show. There goes the rim protector for the Mavs, because he has to come out. Let's say they switch it. Now it's Luka on Kristaps, and then it's Drew. He can beat Derek Lively to the rim, right? Like that's going to be something interesting as well, and we've seen that. So that's something that I'm also looking at. That's a pick and roll advantage that the Celtics have, right? They can run a lot of those and challenge the big man and Luka in pick and roll coverage, right? That's gonna cause some problems for the Mavs, and I'm sure they've got their plans for that. We'll see what happens. The only thing I can think of is that they would put Luka on Derek White, but then it would just be Derek White and Kristaps Porzingis pick and roll. So the Celtics are going to try their best to engage with the big man, whether it's Lively or Gafford, and Luka Doncic in pick and roll coverage. I think that's going to be a big advantage. And it's funny because that's the same advantage that the Mavs have on their end. If you're putting Jaylen Brown on Luka, that's one of your better defenders as well. He's going to be parked on the other side of the floor while the Mavs run pick and rolls on a weak side. I don't know. Like there's a lot that can go wrong for both of these teams. I just want to know how Jrue Holiday handles the center switch, because the Celtics are going to have to blitz if they want to deny that. And that's exactly what they did in that second game. When Kyrie would call for the pick and roll with Lively, Jrue would just blitz it. And you know, with KP on PJ Washington, obviously Luka's going to try to get Kristaps in as many pick and rolls as he can to try to figure him out and see if he can beat him. That's going to be interesting as well. I want to know how they guard that. Both teams have done a really good job of defending the three-point line. That's going to be key, because if the Celtics can take away the Mavs threes the way Minnesota did in a really good way, and Minnesota did it with drop coverage. They had the on-ball defender just fight over and deny the three, and then they were just giving up all these inside looks, right? A lot of little mid-range jumpers, a lot of shots at the rim, and, you know, people complaining about Gobert and drop coverage, and, you know, they tried blitzing. That didn't really work too well. I think that the Celtics will do a much better job of playing in different coverages because of the mobility, because of the length, the size, the athleticism. I just think these guys can answer multiple questions for pick and roll coverages, whether they peel switch, whether they just switch outright, whether they're playing in a drop for whatever reason, if they're going to drop, if they want to fight over. There's a lot of things the Celtics can do. They can pre-switch the way they do with Tatum when they put him on Lively. I really don't know how this series is going to go, other than knowing how these teams opted to pick each other up in those two games in the regular season that aren't going to mean much, because I saw the way the Suns beat the Timberwolves in the regular season, and it looked nothing like that come playoff time. So I don't know how much different it's going to be in the finals matchup-wise. I'm leaning towards the team that I don't even trust, which is the Celtics. The Mavs haven't had home court advantage all playoffs long, and it hasn't mattered. And honestly, not confident in knowing that the Celtics have home court advantage because of the fact that they've blown a couple of home games in like the worst way. So that's definitely something that worries me. The mental toughness that Luka and the Mavs have, Kyrie as well, versus what I question from the Celtics, which is that mental toughness. These guys shoot a lot of threes. They tend to isolate. They get into panic mode. And you're playing against this guy. It doesn't matter what the moment is. It doesn't matter who's talking to him. It doesn't matter who's in front of him, what coverage it is. Luka has figured it out every single series. And so it's all going to be about consistent communication between the Celtics on defense, effort, sharing the ball on offense. How do they get their looks? Are they just going to play one-on-one? Because that's going to play to the Mavs' favor. The Mavs are going to try their best to switch, because that's kind of what they do. They don't want to give space, and that could play into the Celtics' favor. However, I'm worried about the fact that if the Mavs are switching everything, do the Celtics start mismatch hunting? That's something that I'm concerned about, because when they mismatch hunt and then the shots aren't falling, the Mavs are on the other side playing chess with Luka kind of dissecting the defense, playing in pick and rolls and just looking. Oh, you dropped? Okay, here's a step back. I'm shooting a three. Oh, you're with me? Okay, I'm going to just get downhill until someone decides to help you. If I get you beside me, maybe I'm calling for a screen and I'm going to fake the drop-off pass, and then I'm going to have a step back here. So there's a lot of things that Luka does. Hard to put them all in one video. The reason I am picking the Celtics right now is because I do feel like, regardless of some of the disappointing moments that they've given us, and they have been very disappointing, just awful losses here and there, even in other playoff runs, they are known to choke. And that's something that I'm worried about when I pick this team. But I do think that this team has what they need to beat the Mavs. If they have a healthy Porzingis, I think that changes this whole thing. And I think that that's going to be the difference in this series. Can't wait for game 1 on Thursday. Let's see how this whole thing plays out.